It is official. Former New York Governor Andrew Cuomo releasing a video on X minutes ago saying he is back in the race for New York City mayor. He will run as an independent candidate after getting crushed in the Democratic primary by Democratic socialist Zohran Mamdani. Mamdani, who won the primary with a decisive 12-point victory, champions a citywide rent freeze on rent-stabilized units, a call that has rattled landlords, real estate interests, and even some economists ahead of November's mayoral election. Jeff Greene is a self-made billionaire real estate entrepreneur with holdings in New York, Palm Beach, and all around the country. He first experienced rent control while attending Harvard Business School when he purchased a home in Somerville, Massachusetts. Because if I recall right, Jeff, you couldn't afford the dorms, so you bought a kind of a rundown building. You thought, oh, maybe I'll just buy the building, and it was really cheap, and then you found that you were dealing with rent stabilization, right?
Well, no, it wasn't that I couldn't afford the dorms. I didn't get into the good apartment complex, so I bought a 3-decker to live in. Okay. And at the time, the city of Somerville had, had rent control, and it was actually voted out while we were there, which is a very brave move for the alderman. As a matter of fact, when I was at Harvard Business School, I took a course at the Kennedy School, and I wrote a paper on rent control in 1978. And I had looked at all kinds of research that had shown that rent control laws absolutely do nothing but hurt housing and housing prices and rents. And it's almost 50 years later, we're still talking about doing this, coming up with using this, which we know is ineffective.
Tell me and tell our viewers why rent freezes don't work. Because let's just say I am one of the many people, because the voters spoke in this primary, who can't afford to live in New York, or they're really, really stressed by the high rent payments, who say, well, wait a minute, rent freeze sounds good. I should be able to have a decent job and pay my rent. Explain why it works in the reverse.
Well, I mean, look, you were talking about making mortgage payments with Encore in your last segment.
Yeah.
I'm sure you'd love to have your mortgage frozen the rest of your life. I mean, I'd like to have my mortgage payment frozen and my insurance payment frozen. Everyone would rather have all their expenses frozen. But the reality is that right now we have New York City, and a lot of cities in the country have housing shortages. So how do you solve a housing shortage? Is by creating more housing. You're not going to create more housing by making it so unappealing to developers to build housing. And that's exactly what's happened in New York. I have 3 projects in New York. We have one in Hudson Square, which is kind of just between Tribeca and West Village. We have a waiting list there. Every time we get a notice for someone to move out, there's another tenant paying higher rent lined up for that apartment. What is that saying to me? It's saying there's a huge housing shortage in New York City. Look, I'm all in favor. We're a wealthy country. If somebody has a hardship, they're elderly, they're disabled, and they can't afford housing, as a country, we should offer that subsidies. And that's why we have Section 8 programs for people who hopefully legitimately, have hardships. But to just freeze rents across the board, all you're doing is completely discouraging any investor or developer from investing in markets that are desperate to get new housing.
Who would you consider financially backing? You are not a New York resident, obviously, but you have properties here. Cuomo just announced via a thing on X, a video on X, that he's in. There's Mayor Eric Adams, who is also running as an independent because he didn't win the Democratic primary. And it's almost like the Hunger Games at this point.
Well, look, I mean, they're both better choices. I mean, I get what Mamdani's doing. I mean, he's trying to appeal to people by giving away something free. I'm going to freeze your rent if you vote for me. And the most voters, would rather have both frozen rents. Who wouldn't want their rent frozen? I understand. But policymakers should not be doing these cheap programs, which is really taking advantage of the desperation of how scared people are about their rents. Because what you're really doing is you're going to cause their kids aren't going to ever be able to afford to live in New York. Because who's going to build a new building when these cities just keep freezing rents and keep taking away the income of those who are invested in this city?
What is the number one thing that you wish you could see from New York City and the government here that would inspire more building?
Well, it's very simple. How do you get more building? Zoning is one thing. If you give people zoning incentives to get, more housing, if you on a lot, maybe higher floor area ratios, higher density. Like in the state of Florida, we have a workforce program now where the state actually has gone in and overridden every city zoning law and said that if you build 40% or more workforce housing in any city in Florida, you can build the highest height allowed within a mile of the building, unless it's next to a residential neighborhood, the highest height, and the double, 1.5 times the highest floor area ratio. And so what they're saying is, we want workforce housing. We want affordable housing in Florida. So we're going to make it so appealing to the real estate developers and investors that we're going to give them a chance to make some money. The other side of that is there's no property taxes at all on that 40% of workforce housing. So they've made it so appealing, you're going to see even more housing built in Florida. New York has to start thinking the same way, or otherwise, everyone in New York is going to move to Florida, which is great for someone like me who's a big investor there, but pretty tough in New York.
Jeff, it's good to see you, and you have real world experience with all of these situations, so we really appreciate it. Thank you for coming on.